Last week I talked about some seasons in my life where I went through some depression, some mental illness stuff. If you haven't watched that, I would suggest you do. It was very helpful for me to be transparent, and it's also helpful for us to know we're all kind of in the same boat with being broken. And with that, there is one of my favorite figures in the Bible, Paul. He also had seasons where he had an issue, and I just want to talk about that today. Because going forward, all of us have an issue that we're going to be facing at some point. There's no respecter of position or privilege. All of us will have seasons where things change and it may become permanent. So, in light of that, I just wanted to go through Paul's own understanding of it and talk about what his life can teach us. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm getting kind of tired of hearing all these titles people are coming up with for this quarantine time due to the coronavirus that we're all going through. I've heard, often I hear these unprecedented times on the news, or I hear somebody say this unique time or these trying times. And I'm even sick of me trying to just say, well, this season we're in, I'm sick of hearing it when I say it. And one of them I've heard quite often has been this term, the new normal, our new normal. Well, for me, I actually first heard that term about, 2 or 3 years ago in a message given by one of my favorite pastors, Andy Stanley. And Andy Stanley was talking about this idea of your new normal. But here's what he was actually talking about in his message. He was talking about when something radically changes in your life. It hits you out of the blue and things are never going to be what they used to be. And things like this. This is from Andy Stanley's message. When your health situation is permanent. Something you thought was just a passing season or passing ailment, it's going to be your new permanent, your new normal. That a loved one, they're never walking through that door again, whether it's because of a divorce or perhaps a death or a split of a relationship. But the truth of it is, they're just never coming back. It's permanent. And there's just nothing you can do, perhaps, in your new normal, as Andy Stanley was talking about. There's nothing you can do to alter your child's circumstances. Maybe as a parent, you see them going into a marriage, or they're in a marriage, there's nothing you can do. You have no authority. You can only try to influence. But really, it just seems like, man, what you see with the pain they have is going to be with you present forever. And that's what Andy Stanley was referring to when he talked about your new normal. I just want to kind of hop on that in light of what I spoke about last week. These seasons that we go through, that some of us, we will always have issues that we go through. And in light of that, I just thought this would be helpful to just kind of talk about this. What do you do? Where do you go when your situation has changed so radically? And it's actually a really heavy topic. I realize that right now, even as I say this, the odds are that many of you listening have just had those things occur this past year. You've had a major diagnosis that your health is never going to be what it was. You've had the loss of a relationship. And in fact, I think if you're here in the Mid-Valley and Sweet Home, we've been reminded again how things can change so quick. And we've all been reminded how it's tragic that what was once to be expected is never going to be there for people. And so I realize how heavy it is, and it's a heavy weight to bear to kind of think I can share and speak on it. But I decided I'd just talk from Paul's life, because it's actually universal. It was universal for Paul, it's universal for us. It's no respecter of your financial status or your professional position. It really doesn't matter, because every one of us, the best of us, will experience difficulties that leave us pleading with God. So I just want to look at the Apostle Paul today, and let me just again talk about the importance of Paul. You see, Paul was a convert to Christianity following an encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus, this town where he was going to continue in his quest to persecute Christians. He hated this new threat to the Jewish way of life, the Jewish religion called followers of the way. The way, he hated them. He was trying to exterminate them. But in his approach to do so into a city, he actually met Jesus, and he left that encounter, as we all do when we encounter Jesus, transformed. And he became the single greatest historical influence on the spread of Christianity in the world. You see, what Paul would do, using his rights as a Roman citizen, he would travel around the Mediterranean region and he would just share this incredible news of the gospel, the good news that God had pursued us, and it had pursued us even to the point of death to reconcile us, that we in our status as paper and him in his status as holy, status as fire, that through Jesus we had been reconciled, that we could stand in his presence and we could commune with him. And Paul would share this. And it's such an amazing message that people in these cities all around the Mediterranean region would become the church. Not a building, but the church, the body of believers. And so what Paul would do is he would stay with these churches for a while and he would grow them. He would disciple them. And then after appointing leadership, he would leave, but he would also send letters back just to check in on them, like a father checking in on his children. And one of the cities that he developed this group of believers was in the city of Corinth. Because of that, we have two letters that Paul wrote back to the believers at Corinth. The first is called 1 Corinthians, and the second, strangely enough, is called 2 Corinthians. And so Paul is a huge, huge deal to us in the faith. You see, 14 of the 27 books in the New Testament were written by Paul, were letters written by Paul. And in 2 Corinthians 12, and you guys can look at it on your own, I'm not going to read the whole thing, let me just tell you what's happening. Paul is describing this amazing experience he had. Let me just kind of paraphrase it for you. You see, Paul begins to talk about this person. He says, just this guy. And I love how he says it. This guy had this amazing experience where, I don't know if it was a dream, I don't know if it was real, but he was actually, this guy, taken up into heaven. And he saw this amazing stuff and heard amazing things, this guy. And I love it because I can so relate to that. I have been actually humbled to be in certain situations, in hospital rooms or with doctors specifically, when for some reason God has decided to work, and it's overwhelmed me in the moment, so much so that I feel like I don't even want to share with people necessarily my role or what I did or what happened. So I could get that. But you want to talk about it. That's what Paul is doing. He had this amazing high, that he just had this amazing thing that just left him charged up and ready to launch forward into his ministry. He's excited. What a tremendous validation that he's doing the right thing, that he's pursuing the right priority, the right perspective. He is following his purpose, so much so that he has this mystical experience and he is ready. Well, right after that, just as he's riding high, he's hit hard by life. He gets this thorn in his flesh, a messenger of Satan sent to torment him. And that's his own words. Let me, in fact, read to you out of verse, I believe it's going to be 7 in chapter 12. He says, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away. So 3 times he actually had this thing hit him and he pled for God to take it away. And so there's been many theories that have been given as to what this thorn in his flesh might have been. Was it physical? I don't know why some people would think, but some scholars have said maybe he was an epileptic, that maybe there's some historical background to think that was a physical thing that he had, and that he had these seasons where it was a malady. Was it just eyesight? There's some hints that people have come up with that would say Paul had horrible eyesight. Or was it emotional? We don't know. Was it, in fact, maybe even like we talked about last week? Was it, in fact, depression or anxiety that he himself suffered from? Or perhaps it was just a specific circumstance relationally. Maybe there was an individual who would just come along in these times and just make his life absolutely miserable. And while we don't know what the exact issue was, we know that it was an issue that hit Paul on 3 separate occasions. And I think it'd probably be more realistic and more accurate to say that it was 3 separate seasons. In fact, when I talked to you guys last week, and if you didn't watch it, I encourage you to, because I think it's helpful. Really what I was describing was 3 separate seasons in my life where I had this thing that I just dealt with that just was debilitating and took me out almost. And so I understand these seasons that Paul is talking about. But in these 3 separate occasions, it actually became so bad that Paul prayed to God. He pleaded with God to remove this thing from his life. Now, While I may not know the exact source of his troubles, I can certainly tell you what he was feeling. Because not just in those things that I talked about last week have I pleaded for God to remove them. There's been other times in my life that I've asked for God to remove things. And each time, while the exact circumstances may have looked different, I want you guys to hear, in our lives, in these seasons, they always have two things in common. And the first is this: in my own life, they were painful. They were just painful. And there's different types of pain. There's a physical pain, and some of you out there struggle with that, as I do, and many people I know. These seasons where a specific malady just became so severe that it just consumed all my energy. If you struggle with chronic pain, it's hard to explain to people what it is. It doesn't just suck you dry of energy. It does more than that. It dictates your entire life. For one, it's hard to sleep when you have physical pain. So it dictates your sleep patterns. And when you don't sleep, man, then sudden exhaustion just comes upon you and you realize you can't do certain stuff in the course of a day. So physical pain can dictate your entire schedule. And I can just tell you, physical pain, and people have dealt with it much more than I have, and they've shared the same bit. I just dipped my toe in it. They're immersed in the chilly waters. We all say this, so it's frustrating. It's just frustrating. So perhaps Paul was going through physical pain, I don't know, but I can tell you that he was going through pain, because every one of these seasons where we plead with God, it has some sort of pain. Maybe it was emotional pain. You see, every season we have where we plead with God has pain, whether it's physical or emotional. I spoke to you last week about my own struggles with depression and anxiety. But I can say this, that I actually didn't give you the worst emotional pain that I've ever felt. I can tell you that far and away, and you parents know the truth of what I'm about to say, the emotional pain in these seasons that I have pled for God to just remove, to intercede and take it, well, it's been when my kids have been suffering. And there's no pain like when you see your children suffering, whether it's with the decisions that they're making with lifestyle choices of drugs and alcohol or sexual promiscuity or whatever, or whether it's physical pain where they've just been delivered a blow that you wish you could just take from them. I know from firsthand experience, though, this: whatever kind of pain it is, whether it's physical pain that you yourself personally have, or whether it's emotional pain that you have for some other people, or depression or anxiety, I can tell you this: pain causes you to plead. It just does. It's the reaction to plead with God to take this away. The second thing each of these seasons within my life had in common was that everywhere I looked was one word: limitations. Everywhere you look in these seasons where you're pleading with God, every one of these things, no matter where I look, I just see that I can't do anything. There's no rational path that I can take, no rational behavior I could take that is going to give me what I want, to change my circumstances in the way that I want them to change. I mean, the questions that you hear yourself just kind of saying are things like this: will I ever be able to? And the answer comes back, well, probably not. Will my child ever? No. Will he ever? No. There's just limitations. What happens when you have that present pain, you just project that into your future. And again, you butt up against the limit of what you can do because you think, man, this is the way it's always going to be. So the two things I can tell you, that every season that we plead has pain involved and it has limitations everywhere. This idea of an impasse, that there's no rational thing that we can actually do. And so we plead with God. And so twice, Paul pleads with God to remove this thing from his life. Verse 8, I'll say it again. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. Twice he pleads with God to remove this thing from his life, this circumstance, this situation that is just as ours are, painful, physically, emotionally draining. And it's actually, and I want you to consider this, it's limiting him from living his best life, from doing what he wanted to do. And what was his best life? Man, he had just seen things that our eyes will never behold, that had just launched him with this absolute power of purpose and priority from this heavenly perspective to chase after the things that God had called him to do, this ministry. And it's coming back, and I can't do all of that because of this thing, this pain I feel. this limit that has been placed upon my life. And I get that, man. I get that, because I want to tell you guys this. When I have had seasons where I have literally pled for God to remove this situation from my life, it has never been about possessions. It's never been about, man, God, my house is too small. Please, Lord, give me a bigger. It's never been that way. Oh, my car. It's never been for possessions. It's never been for vacations that has moved my heart to plead with God to do it. I mean, we may think those are a big deal, but those of you who've went through the big deals, you realize that all of that becomes extraneous when you have relational issues, when you have physical pain that is just debilitating, that's keeping you from enjoying the life that God gave you as a blessing. Enjoying the life with your family and with your kids, that you can't do these things. And those are the things when I have pled with God, not for cars or possessions, but around health, relationships. Those, when these things are wrong and they're hurting me, my health, the health of people I love, the relationships between me and my wife are strained, or other things that are so important to me, everything else just dissipates. And my life becomes focused, my entire energy becomes focused on this small pinpoint in my life that is just debilitating me. And it's always a good thing that I'm craving. God, let me pursue this family relationship, this relationship with other people. Let me have my health so I can more freely pursue these things. And that's what Paul was feeling. They're God-honoring things. They're good things that seem to be limited, that seem now to be a source of pain somehow. And so Paul, in 2 seasons where this issue became so painful and restrictive, he pleads with God to remove it. He pleads with God to remove it. And guys, just like we always know, man, God hears. And God was silent. God said nothing. He pled with God to remove it, and God is silent. I can't tell you the number of times over the past, I don't know how many years, but specifically even like last month, that I've met with people who pray for God to remove things, good Christian people, and they're taught somehow that God would never be silent. God would never come back silent, that the footprints in the sand, we've all seen the poster. The only time there's one footprint there is because I've done something wrong, and I have to tell them that no, sometimes God is silent. And he was silent with Paul. And what I share, though, and I'll just push pause on this, what I share in those sessions where I'm trying to encourage people is to never mistake his apparent absence as apathy. Because God always cares. He cares deeply. But going back to the narrative, what Paul's going through here. Paul twice pleads and gets no answer. Complete silence. And I have felt that. I have felt shelved and just been the good soldier and said, I know this is true, so I'll continue, but I'm just confused as to why I don't get the result from you, why I don't get the response from you. And I get what Paul is. And I bet there are many of you out there who have felt the same way when you've pled with God to change circumstances that are so painful in areas of your life that are God-honoring things, and he hasn't. He's been silent. So then once again, though, it hits him. Once again, like I talked about last week, seasons of what I've dealt with just come washing over me again. And Paul has the same experience. It's a third time, the season where this issue becomes so severe that he pleads again. And this time he discovers that not only is this issue painful, not only is it limiting, but it's also permanent. It's his new normal. When God says, no, I have something else for you. And so going back to those verses, verse 9, he said in response to Paul's pleadings, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, that I'm not going to remove something. This is going to be what you deal with, but something is coming. There's a promise there. And many of you, like me, we know the feeling. We know the feeling of praying for something, of pleading, of bargaining, of bartering. And here's one to get. Your faith was solid. I deal many times with wonderful, adult, mature Christian men and women who feel guilty because their faith is solid. They pray, they go to Scripture, They continue their lives in such a way that is God-honoring, and they assume, they think that if they do that, that somehow that God is going to just remove something. And when He doesn't, when He is silent on the matter, they feel guilty. They feel guilty, like something they did. And I can tell you this, and this is going to be a radical thought for many people out there who have lived their lives in this fashion. And they somehow in the back of their head, they thought, well, there must be something I've did, or maybe something they did that brought this upon them, which is a common thing all the way back to Jesus' time, when they thought that the consequences of sin in this world, this sinful, broken world, must be something you did or I did. And to these people, I can say, these people who feel guilty as wonderful Christian men and women, that they asked and they pled and they bartered and they prayed and it didn't happen, and they feel guilty. I will say this: you can't faith it away. You see, we all come into seasons where we can't faith it away. That this is my new normal. This is the situation that I have. I am going to have this pain. I am going to deal with this struggle. I said last week, 1 in 5 people will have a lifetime struggle of dealing with something, with a mental, emotional illness. Hello. I'm one of them. This is the new thing for me, but it hasn't been new. It's permanent, though. It's been going on for a while. So many of you out there understand that child's not coming back. That husband's not coming back. Your youth is not coming back, and old age is settling in upon me. If I did everything right, even that, man, God, what is going on? He's silent on the matter, and you just can't faith some of these things away. But I want to pause a moment and let you know something else. Not only can you not faith it away, you can't fake it away either. You see, I know of Christians who, many believers in the church, who they've prayed, they've pled about it, they thought they could faith it away. When that didn't happen, they thought they would just fake it away. I'll act like I'm not hurting. Last week, I got people coming to me when I shared that I have dealt with emotions and I've dealt with feelings. And people came to me and they were thinking, "What? Are you okay? Is it amazing? Are you okay? It's amazing that you've went through. I never knew." And here's what I want to say. It is a sad statement that we in the church, where the broken should come and realize that we're all broken, it is a sad statement that we still feel as if somehow we have to fake as if we're not. It is a sad statement, and it's not true. So you can't fake it away either. You can't fake it away and act like, "Oh, I'm not hurting," if you are. But you know what? Some people out there, and I'm not speaking now about the members of the church and the people who tried to pray it away and then fake it away. I mean just people who've come to a spot in their life and realize, man, this life is not going to be what I wanted. Some people have reached a point in a season when it got rough and it got lonely, and in their loneliness, they pursued sexual gratification. Some people, to escape your pain, you turn to alcohol, to drugs. Maybe in your marriage, it just didn't turn out the way that you had thought it was going to be. And so just to escape the ever-present reminders that it is lacking in what you wanted it to be, you just turn to your career. I mean, there's no shortage of distractions to say, no shortage of people that will tell you that, man, just pouring yourself into the career at the expense of your family, man, that's okay. And it actually, I love hard workers, man. I love hard workers, but at the expense of your family versus for the blessings of your family, it's a running away. You can't fake it away. Maybe you're like many people I know, that we just try to hit the gym and we think, well, I can just work hard, long hours, that physical fitness, trying to make people think that this is so pretty that I'm not broken will somehow heal my brokenness, but it's not going to. That this is your new normal. If Paul can say it was painful and it was limiting and it was permanent, we too will face these situations. But maybe some of you out there in these seasons of pain, these reminders that life was not going to be what you thought it was going to be, maybe you just left. Maybe you just abandoned the family. Maybe you abandoned your children. Maybe you abandoned your spouse. Maybe you just ran from job to job. Maybe you just ran because dealing with this idea that it's painful and it's limiting and it could be permanent, you just try to run from the reality. But has that ever really worked? Has it ever really worked to just run, to give up, to bail, to pretend it's not there, to just try to put a blind eye to the pain in your life or in the life of other people? I can tell you that all of us want to get to a spot where we have peace All of us want to get to a spot where we have contentment, where we once again experience joy on the other side of this season. And I can tell you, if you're in a season where you're feeling all these things, you're feeling a pain of some kind, and everywhere around you is the word limited, you can't do anything rationally to change where you're at. This is your new normal. And when you think, I'm just going to look into the future, and your present pain is projected into the future, and you can't see it ever changing, and perhaps your situation won't. Well, I can tell you this, that to get from where you're at here to there, the day that you will once again feel joy and feel peace and contentment, even if your situation doesn't change, I can tell you that running never gets you from here to there. It never has. But what's interesting is we as Christians, we should more than anyone be aware that life is hard and sometimes very painful, in fact, nearly unbearable. But let's take a look at what Paul says in his own story in verse 9, the story that he is sharing with us. He said, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses and insults and hardships and persecutions and difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." And we'll read the second part of that again in just a minute, but I wanted to read it all because I want you to understand that our pain as a believer always comes with a promise. One of the lies that I hear wrapped in Christianese, almost like it comes from Scripture, is this: God will never give you more than you can bear. That's a lie. I'll say it, that's a lie. That's a lie from the pit of hell, because it actually, the worst lies somehow feel as if they have an element of truth to them, and it sounds great, but it's a lie. It's a lie that God will never allow you to experience more than you can bear. It's a lie. Ask the individual who's lost a child or a spouse. Ask the survivor of domestic abuse. Ask a parent whose child will never be like the other children. Never, from birth, will struggle with things, will be limited with things. Ask the abandoned husband, or ask the recipient of that diagnosis, this permanent, painful medical diagnosis. Ask them, say, hey, ask them to forgive, to heal, to hope, to love. Ask them to just rejoice again, just on their own, just with their own power they have, to just somehow turn all that into something. It's a lie. You see, in these times, we are always in this life given more than we can bear, so that we actually turn to the one who can bear everything, including our pains and our struggles. The promise that comes with our pain is that we are not alone, that God has poured out His grace. And because of His grace He's poured out to us, we have access to His Spirit. Every one of you who watch these online, you see what we talk about every week. When it has the Life Point blurb come up, it says, love God, love people, walk in the Spirit. We have access to walk, even in the midst of our pain, with the Spirit who counsels us, who comforts us, and never wants us to simply fake it. But like a good father, like any good, I try to be a good dad, and I'm not even a great dad, but even when my children are hurting, I want them to come to me with their troubles and their deepest hurts and their roughest seasons. I want them to come to me. Why? Because I love them. And He loves us the same way, even if you today are actually the cause of your present pain. He loves us and wants you to not fake it, but to be real with Him. And some of you have shared with me that you have never experienced His love, His grace, and His power as deeply as you have during those difficult, painful, and limiting seasons. And I felt the same way, and that's the promise God gave Paul. In light of that, let's read it again. Therefore, my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. My power, God says, is made perfect in your weakness. I wrote this, the bulk of this, about 3 or 4 years ago, and as I was writing this, I remember this, so I put it in here, that this song came on, and the song is Lord, I Need You. And I don't know if you know the words, but it's pretty easy. I just said them all. It's, Lord, I need you, oh, I need you, every hour I need you. And I remember in that moment in my office, just overwhelmed with this feeling that that's it. That's all I need to say. I wish I could just got everybody. And I wouldn't, in my office, hearing that song in that moment, feeling the power of that, and realize that we don't need to preach this message. It's just the truth. We need God. We need Him for everything. We need Him for the first breath. I definitely need Him to battle these allergies. I need everything. I need Him for my sense of identity, my value I get from the love that He placed upon me in His pursuit of me. I need God in every season, so much more so even in these seasons where, yes, I've been given more than I can bear, so that I will turn to Him, His grace that He's extended to me. And then the next thing was, right after that, there was this next song that came on that's my all-time favorite worship song, and it was this, How He Loves Us. And it simply somehow goes like this somewhere in there. It says, and oh, how He loves us, oh, oh, how He loves us, how He loves us, oh. That's it. He loves us. And I just thought, that's it. That's all I'm trying to say in this whole message. If we understand how much we need Him and how much He loves us. He loves us and we need Him. If we understood that the best life is lived within this constant awareness of those two things, that He loves us and we need Him, and because we need Him and He loves us, He's available to us, man, it changes everything. But we will undergo trials and pain. C.S. Lewis put it this way: He whispers in our pleasures, but shouts in our pains. Because far too often when things are going great, we forget. We ignore God. We focus our attention on things that were never intended to satisfy our heart's greatest need. We look at these pleasures of life. But Paul knew that he had personally experienced the good life. He knew that the abundant life was a life walking in the Spirit, seeking God's presence, forsaking his agenda for God's purpose. And again, yes, a life lived in constant awareness of how much He loves us and our desperate need for Him. So Paul, and speaking of this thorn that tormented him that I talked about in verse 7, that brought pain and limitation, that he actually pled 3 times for God to remove. He uses the word given. It means nothing to us except, in its original translation, isn't it exciting and powerful and awesomely weird to know that that word given is the same word that translates to a gift meant to bring joy? It's the same word as someone would use to say, I'm giving you a birthday gift as a token of love. Paul said this season, these 3 seasons were a gift to him because they delivered something to him that was amazing, this awareness, this newfound sense of intimacy, because he absolutely turned to God to get through them. If the abundant life is in Christ, then these things, adversity, difficult circumstances, unknown futures, they allow us to feel His love, to feel His comfort, His grace, His power as we turn to Him. I know right now that you guys have the same questions I do about the problem with pain in this world and God's role in it and how it all works. I don't know. Can I just say that? I don't know. I don't know all the answers about God's role or non-role in the pain that we see around us. But I do know that the greatest miracle I've seen in my own life can be found in Romans 8:28. For we know that all things work together for good to those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. I can tell you that I have seen it in my own life, that things that the enemy intended for evil, the world's hardships, man, God has brought something glorious and wonderful out of them. Every time on the other side of these struggles and pain, I have discovered that God's power reaches its full measure in my weakness, which is why believers will often tell you, and I would say about last week, I just said I would never want to not have what I discovered through my seasons of mental illness and depression. It's shaped me in such a way that I've gotten this great gift. Many people would say this, and I've heard somebody, I wrote it down, they said, I would never have chosen this, and I wished it hadn't happened. But I wouldn't go back to before if it meant losing what I've found. So when you ask a believer in the middle of a tragedy, oftentimes, how are you doing? They kind of give you this look, almost confused, and they just say, you know what, I'm surprisingly okay. I'm surprisingly well. I've shared the story of, and I won't read the whole thing, about when my youngest son was born, Caden, and he almost died, and we began to make these journeys back and forth on I-5. And I don't know when I saw it, but on the I-5 going down there, I looked, and on the trip down, I saw a cross at night. And I told people, I've said this for years, I got so angry that I just began to cuss at God. I began to curse at God. That how come this is happening to my child? The pain I felt was so great, and the limit, possible death to him, was so great that I cursed. I was angry. And I can tell you, I went to the hospital. On the way back, I saw it, and I pulled over, and I began to cry at the realization of my pain, the limits I felt. But something happened on the trip. Every time I went by that cross, I would begin to pour out my pain to God. And it was weird, because I began to look forward to that point in my journey, that I would look at that hill and I would understand, man, this is my chance to tell him how I'm feeling. And what I can say is this: the end of that story always is this. God healed Caden in many ways, but he didn't absolutely remove everything. But what he did do was change something tremendous, which was not my circumstance, but my heart. What I learned through that circumstance with Caden has been amazing. And I will say again, I would never have chosen this, and I wish it hadn't happened. But I would never want to go back to who I was before if it meant losing what I have found. I was outside our house last summer, and I began to hear the big thunder rolling across the hills. And isn't that amazing here in the Mid-Valley, when you can see the lightning rolling over the mountains? And I looked at that hill, and I thought again about the hill with the cross that I saw, the cross, Caden's cross. And I thought about this written in Psalm 121. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore. And I can tell you this, that is not normal, but it is amazing. And it is the truth for this season and every season of life. So two things I just want to address before we leave this time together. One is for my mother in Mississippi, who right now is very troubled after watching what she just saw. No, Mother, this is not a real tattoo. It's a fake tattoo. So don't worry about it. You don't have to call me. It's fake. And the other is this. Honestly, guys, I am sick and tired of just talking into a camera. This is not what I necessarily want to do. I miss you guys, those of you who know I love you. And, you know, those are the people who are seeing me get more and more, kind of weepy on my social media. Miss you guys. So with that in mind, we are going to be holding our very first live service, LifePoint, sometime soon, at a site to be determined. So all that simply to say this: if you guys could just be prayerfully considering whatever role you want to have in this thing. I miss you guys, and if it's something you want to be a part of, you're invited to be a part of what we have going on. We're going to have some live services because I miss people. We were designed for a relationship, and as beautiful as all of this is, none of it makes my heart feel as full as it does when I'm surrounded by the people in this community that I love. So stay in touch, stay tuned for all the information coming out, but we're going to do this thing together, people. I love you guys.